Welcome to the Patreon NHL Ice Guys. It is the season finale edition of the show. I'm Ian Cameron, joined by Andrew McGinnis. Alex B. Smith is tending to a personal matter today, so he won't be with us. Jimmy Murphy tied up with a lot of stuff revolving around his work with following the Boston Bruins, so it's understandable why he's been absent a few times lately. But nevertheless, this is our final, in this format, episode of the season. This is our season recap show, our Stanley Cup Finals recap show, and then basically we will be also looking ahead to the Stanley Cup Futures board that has already been posted. If you look at a lot of sports books offshore, you will see that futures pricing has already been posted for next year's Stanley Cup. So there has not been any sort of time wasted by anyone getting that up there. So definitely some opportunities to look at what may be next year in terms of who might win the Stanley Cup. We'll investigate that as well. We'll start with a recap of what we just saw in the Stanley Cup Finals, and what we just saw in Game 7 specifically last night was a game that could have been completely different if not for Jordan Binnington in the first period. I mean, it was pretty much all Bruins early on. They had the power play, the only power play of the game. They had it in the first period. 3 or 4 glorious chances, and 3 or 4 not just good, not just great, 3 or 4 unbelievable, miraculous, magnificent saves by Jordan Binnington during that sequence to keep the game scoreless. And Boston, you could tell there was just a little bit of frustration setting in at that time. Sure enough, just I think a few minutes after Boston was just relentless in the St. Louis zone for the majority of the first period, and after that failed power play where they had several unbelievable chances and just didn't cash in, lo and behold, what happens? Just a minute or two later, there's St. Louis, a couple of shifts in the offensive zone, and they get the Ryan O'Reilly deflection goal. Who else but Ryan O'Reilly to get things turned around in the right direction for the St. Louis Blues? That big 1-0 goal, and then of course is really a mental lapse by the Boston Bruins. I think down 1-0 going into the first period, they would have had a better chance to regroup. But you give up that goal, just that killer with 8 seconds to go. You know, a bad line change. Brad Marchand completely lapsing defensively on that play. Nobody picking up Alex Pietrangelo, who really made a phenomenal decision. He knew that, hey, when there's under 10 seconds to go in the period, I can pinch, because even if we get caught the other direction, there's probably not enough time for the Bruins to get to the other end of the ice for an opportunity. So it was a smart, wise move by Pietrangelo to move up and join the play, join the rush as he did. And he put the backhand in. However, it looked like a great shot live, and it was a nice shot. It went underneath the arm of Tuukka Rask, and it's probably a one that he would have liked to have had. For as nice as a finish as that was by Pietrangelo, went under his arm, up to the top of the net, 2-0 Blues. Just a back-breaking goal. And then in the second period onward, St. Louis really stepped up their game defensively. Boston had a much harder time in the last 40 minutes of that game with getting the offensive zone time that they obviously were able to have in the first period last night. And Jordan Binnington was just a brick wall the entire night. Blues extend the lead in the third period and managed to win 4-1. So I thought St. Louis was deserving of the win for the last 40 minutes. I thought they played better than the Bruins, but you can't overlook the fact that if Jordan Binnington is anything less than exceptional in the first period last night, that could have been 2 or 3-0 Boston after the first period, or at least 3-1 if you include one of the Blues goals scoring, perhaps. And we're maybe talking a different story and a different outcome, and maybe the Bruins hoisting that Stanley Cup on home ice last night instead of the Blues. But nevertheless, congratulations to the St. Louis Blues. I know a few Blue fans from that area. Happy for them. Happy for everybody. Happy for, the people that have been fans of this team from day one that have never seen them win a Stanley Cup till now, and that hadn't even seen them in a Stanley Cup final since 1970 before this Stanley Cup final. Ryan O'Reilly, Conn Smythe winner. Could have gone to Binnington too. Could have gone to Schwartz, a couple other guys too, but no qualms for me seeing him get the Conn Smythe trophy last night. For the St. Louis Blues. He was magnificent, and of course gets the huge goal to get the game going in the right direction for the Blues last night. And how about Craig Berube? What can you say about him as the head coach of this team? He made tremendous adjustments throughout the playoffs, specifically off a loss, which is a big reason why the Blues were so good off a loss. And I'll never forget the press conference where they fired Mike Yeo, and they announced Craig Berube as the interim head coach, and it was Doug Armstrong, the GM of the Blues, in that press conference saying, Craig's going to be our interim coach. We're going to look at interviews with other candidates. And the people in the media that were questioning him that day saying, have you talked to Joel Quenneville yet? Have you talked to all these other guys? He wasn't even on the radar as being the permanent coach. They thought he's just going to be a stopgap coach, temporary coach, interim coach, just someone to fill the void of a lost season, because that's what it felt like for the Blues at that time, a lost season. They were one of the worst teams in the NHL at that point when Mike Yeo was removed. And Craig Berube came in as the interim head coach, to the point where they weren't even looking at the possibility of Craig Berube being the permanent guy. They were still talking about Quenneville and what's Ken Hitchcock up to, and what are some of these other coaches that are available up to that we might be able to interview as potential candidates. Not even a word, not one word about Berube sticking around permanently. And lo and behold, Craig Berube obviously doesn't listen to any of it. He says, I'm still going to coach to the best of my ability. I'm going to do whatever I can to get this team going. And sure enough, St. Louis, from January 1st, they go from worst in the NHL, and to June 13th, here they are, first in the NHL and Stanley Cup champions. Unbelievable story. Incredible turnaround. Congratulations to the St. Louis Blues. And now Craig Berube's job security, I think it's safe. I don't think he's got to worry about being back behind the bench for the St. Louis Blues next season. He goes from just a surefire interim stopgap temporary coach to the permanent coach, and now a Stanley Cup winning coach for the St. Louis Blues. All right, Andrew, let's get your thoughts on what we saw last night and the series overall, with the St. Louis Blues taking it in 7 games over the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, and you bring up so many points that just, ideas are flying out of my head right now. But I guess the first thing to really bring up is, like you said, the Cinderella story. I think it goes without mentioning. I think you have to look at where they were from the start of the season, where they were at the midway point of the season, and where they are now. Congratulations to St. Louis Blues, Stanley Cup champions. Very deserving of it because they put forward an effort every single game. They made adjustments. They won that game in very St. Louis fashion. And I think it proved that first period was so important. And I remember I did talk about yesterday that I thought it'd be a lower scoring first period. And it didn't end up being like that. But how important it really was, whether it's a deflection or what kind of goal it was, how important it was for the Blues to get on the board first. And not only get on the board first, but from a guy like Ryan O'Reilly to get on the board was a huge factor in the game, I thought. Those all-stars, those top guys, top guns, if you want to call them, had to welcome themselves into Game 7, so to speak, early on, and they certainly did that. And I will say, though, Ian, one thing that we haven't usually seen out of this Boston Bruins team that we're not used to seeing, they look kind of deflated. They looked a little bit defeated. And, I'll flash back. I'm sorry to any Toronto Maple Leaf fans out there, but I'll flash back a few years ago, that huge comeback the Bruins made against the Leafs in the third period with about 10 minutes to go. They didn't seem deflated then, but it seemed like the St. Louis Blues' aggression, willingness to trap them in their zone was just so resilient that they just couldn't get anything going. And that was really the whole factor of it. I mean, I regret personally not having a future, and I guess everyone could say that, but I actually liked the St. Louis Blues at the start of the season. But after the first few months of seeing them play, I was like, oh, this team, they're not gelling. There's no chemistry, this, that, and the other thing. But when it comes down to it, that's what I love about hockey, and I'm sure that's the same reason you love about hockey as well, Ian. It's that it's not the Golden State Warriors every single year. It's not the same team every single year like some sports are. Nobody really could have called the St. Louis Blues winning it from day one. Not many people, at least. And that's what makes our league so special. So a great playoffs. We saw some great upsets, and that's what really makes this league so great. But you know what it also does, Ian? It also sets up, our chat for next year, and as we enter next year and talk about things in the summer and starting in September and October with the NHL Ice Guys, it makes it that much more interesting because we've got some teams like the Tampa Bay Lightning still waiting for their time to get there to that Stanley Cup Finals and win one and get things going with that solid core they have, and Winnipeg and Nashville, so many great teams like that. Even look at Vegas where they were knocked out. So many great teams still available and can still do it. So it really just goes to show how tough it is to win that trophy. So I also do want to mention that story. I think the girl's name is Layla.
Layla
I believe.
Anderson, yes, beautiful story,
And
wonderful.
that was a beautiful story. And that's what makes the game so great. I mean, to see the look on her face and in her eyes when she was given the Stanley Cup, it's truly a blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes you realize that some of your petty grievances in life pale in comparison to the struggles and issues other people have to deal with in the course of their life. And nothing opens your eyes up to that fact more than seeing a little girl like Layla Anderson having to battle through what she has to get to this point. So, yeah, phenomenal, touching story there. The whole Gloria, in terms of that, was very interesting too. That the Blues basically heard that song in a Philadelphia bar when they were in town to play the Flyers there, and they started winning after that, and so they just stuck with that being their post-game music after every victory. So just an unbelievable, like Cinderella type of story and run that the St. Louis Blues put together in winning the Stanley Cup. All right, it's great to look back, but it's also good to look forward. And before we wrap up this season finale edition, we're going to look ahead to Stanley Cup Futures next year. Yes, if you look at the majority of books, we're seeing NHL futures betting being open for wagering for the 2019-2020 season, which of course will begin in October. The Tampa Bay Lightning, to hell with them flaming out in the first round of this year's playoffs. Odds makers still like them as the consensus favorite to win the Stanley Cup next year. Tampa Bay, a 7-1 favorite to win it all next year. The top favorite right now. Toronto Maple Leafs right behind them, 10-1. Vegas Golden Knights, 10-1. Boston Bruins, this year's Stanley Cup runner-up, 10-1. Colorado Avalanche, 12-1. The defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues, the sixth favorite to win it, at 14-1. And then after that, you got Calgary 15, San Jose 17, Washington 18, Winnipeg 18, Nashville 18, Dallas 20-1, Pittsburgh 22-1, Florida 25-1, Kakalaki Hurricanes 28-1, New York Islanders 28-1. New York Islanders 28-1 already stands out to me as something that kind of interests me. Year two of Trotz, they should be progressing even further, getting better, and I think they're going to go after some more goal-scoring punch potentially in free agency. They should, at least. And their defense, they obviously got much better at that end of the ice last year. So that already stands out to me as one I'm kind of interested in right now at that price. And there's a bunch of others. Of course, bringing up the rear, no surprise. You've got teams like Anaheim, New Jersey, Detroit, LA Kings, and the Ottawa Senators dead last in terms of winning the Stanley Cup next year. So just briefly, ones that interest me right now that I might just lock in just to say I got this price, because I remember doing that last year on a couple of teams. Colorado 12-1. Obviously, this is a team that could be a beast next year. We already saw the progress they made this year. I think in terms of the top, 6 or 8 favorites, Colorado's the one I'm most interested in at 12-1. Maybe Calgary too, but I want to see where Calgary goes with their goaltending. I do think they need to upgrade that going into this season. And of course, last year I got a much better price on Calgary than I am now. So Colorado 12-1 interests me at that price. Let's see. I mentioned the New York Islanders 28-1 right now to win it. I think great first year under Trotz. You got to think the progression and the improvement could continue. Second year, we'd see Barry Trotz teams usually get better and better each year he's there. I think that could happen there. And here's my sleeper. And man, oh man, did I ever talk this team up a lot this season for a team that didn't even make the playoffs and barely missed making the playoffs. Who?
Arizona Coyotes?
Bingo. 35-1. They played tremendous hockey the last 2 months of the season. They beat some big-time teams. They just ran out of racetrack. They ran out of games, and unfortunately, they just couldn't make up the ground, and everybody else ahead of them kept winning. That is an Arizona team that's on the rise. It's a team to be on the lookout for. I'm not saying they're obviously going to be right there at the end, but you're talking about 35-1 with a team that's on the rise, a team that's hungry, that knows they're getting better. I think Rick Tocchet's done a phenomenal job. Think about all the injuries, too, they had this season, and they still almost made the playoffs. I can't count on them being as injured and lack of health to the extent they had this season. If they're at least even 90% healthier next season, this is a dangerous hockey team. This should be a playoff team next year. Remember, they didn't even have Antti Raanta for most of the season. They'd rely on Darcy Kemper to be their goaltender. Arizona's the ultimate value. Islanders have some value. Arizona's got even more value. I think Arizona could be that team like Carolina this year that didn't make the playoffs last year and just makes a huge rise and maybe an unexpected playoff run potentially if they do get in. Arizona stands out like a sore thumb. 35-1. We'll put some of that in my pocket for sure. So those are the ones that stand out to me right now. Colorado, New York Islanders, and Arizona are the three that I'm kind of looking at right now. Andrew, any current, now keep in mind, these are just locking in good prices. This is keeping in mind that we haven't had the draft yet and we haven't had free agency yet. So these are very small positions for me just to lock in at the price. These teams are going to change their makeup and the rosters are going to look different in about a month or two from now. So we'll revisit it at that point. But this is just price point evaluations right now that on teams that I think have some value with these current futures prices. Andrew, in terms of that, realizing, of course, that these teams could change roster-wise a little bit in the next 2 months, what are some teams from a futures perspective right now that appear to have some value to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up some great points, and you look at these, the top 5 or 6, Ian. You don't really need to look at them at this point in the season. At this point, after we just watched the Stanley Cup, you look at a team like Tampa Bay, Vegas, Boston, Toronto, at those type of odds, 6-1, 7-1, 10-1. You're not really too interested in those, but one team that I really did agree with you on was the New York Islanders, and that's one that I had circled before you even mentioned it. Just the way that they played, the Barry Trotz mentality, the defensive ability, outstanding goaltending. I mean, I love any team, Ian, that can have a backup and a starter, having that 1-2 punch where they can both come in and you can trust them. Kind of something that my team, the Montreal Canadiens, have been looking for years. Kind of have that 1 and 2 position goalie that can actually get both of the job done, kind of like with Rask and Halak this year. But another team I wanted to look at, which, to be honest, I was just shocked. It isn't really too big of a surprise to anybody probably, but Nashville Predators at the Westgate listed at 25-1. And that blew my mind, because if you look at a team like the Washington Capitals, if we all remember, they struggled for years, and they had the core, they had some snipers, they had the players, they had some good defensemen, but it took them a while to get going. And to me, I look at certain times in free agency, Ian, where certain teams will pick up too many players, and I'm a big fan of chemistry and being able to have that balance of knowing your teammates and stuff like that. And I feel like that's what this Nashville team is really growing into. They've had the same core for quite a long time now. And the more you have that, you want to add a few pieces here, a few pieces there. But when you find that set piece that you really like of guys that can really get the job done, then you'll be successful. And I think that, they've kind of gone through the battles. They've gone through some tough series losses, and they've gotten to know each other very well. I think they're definitely a viable, choice here on this list, especially with the odds that we're getting with them. Going down the list, I think, until the draft and until we see what some of these moves look like. I mean, like you said, we got teams like Ottawa, LA, Anaheim, Detroit, New Jersey. I mean, I might be looking at taking New Jersey's, win total over next year, depending on, the moves they make and their drafting and stuff like that. I feel like they'll be a lot better of a team. But for the most part, it's tough to say. And I want to make a point next year to do some season win totals shows on this network with you, because it's important to look at, and it's it's definitely a good way to make some money as far as the future markets go. It's interesting also to look at the Dallas Stars listed at 30-1. I mean, they're a team that's also growing, and they've got some guys kind of hitting their prime. They're really kind of waiting for their spot, waiting for their time to get there, and they showed some heart this year. Going all the way to the playoffs and making it pretty deep and doing their thing. So they've got some guys that can score. They got to figure some things out defensively and get some depth of scoring. But if they can figure that out, they'll be a really solid team. So overall, though, the Islanders and the Predators, 2 teams I'll have my eye on.
Yeah, you can't just spray the board when it comes to the futures. That's why I tried to keep it to 3 teams. But Dallas is the one team that was like my last cut. I guess if I had a 4th or 5th favorite team that I'm kind of interested in futures-wise, Dallas would have been there. Dallas is definitely on the right path. I was impressed with the creative coaching of Jim Montgomery this season for the Dallas Stars. I like the fact that, hey, early in the season, we were playing the run and gun style that usually I coach. Remember, when he was a college coach in Denver, played up and down run and gun hockey, and it worked there. And he was bringing that to Dallas, thinking maybe, hey, maybe we got the talent, we got guys that can make it work. But then they realized, hey, we're not going to be able to win games this way. We got to play more defensive minded from the back end out, slow the pace down a bit, be more sturdy defensively. And that's when the season turned around for Dallas, when they turned into more of that defensive-minded hockey team in the second half of the season. And I think, that's a guy that's been able to adapt to a team, to the players that he has. He says, okay, the way I've coached and allowed my teams to play inside my system in the past was not gelling with this Dallas group early in the year. I got to change the way we do things. He did that, and that's when Dallas took off. So just because they've got a coach that seems to be adaptable, and be able to adjust his style a bit and be able to make some changes to make the team perform at the best level they can. For that reason, too, I think Dallas, they've got some upside for sure as well going into next season. But yeah, those are some good suggestions as well. I'm a little bit less in love with your Nashville thought. I'm worried about them a little bit. Laviolette's been there forever. Is his message waning a little bit on this team? They've certainly got to get way more depth forward for sure. And I'm concerned with some of these defensemen. This was not a great season by any stretch for guys like Yossi. I thought Yossi was up and down this season. Even Subban was making more mistakes than he usually does. For all that love we gave that blue line, I saw a lot of gaffes and a lot of mistakes.
I was the one to make those rants too. I never let them off the hook. I just feel like their time is coming.
Yeah, that's the question. Is the window shut completely on them yet, or is there still one more kick at the can left in the Nashville Predators? We'll find that out next season, because they've always been a perennial playoff team. You and I in complete agreement with the Islanders. And you look at Barry Trotz; his teams have made the playoffs 12 of the last 15 seasons. So you got a pretty damn good chance of getting into the playoffs, at least if you're the New York Islanders again. And at that point, you're sitting going into the playoffs with a team to win the cup at 28-1, because I do think they're going to at least be a playoff team. You'll take your chances. That automatically makes it a worthy bet at that number, 28-1. And all the New York Islanders need, I think, is a little more top-end scoring. They need to support Barzal. Barzal's not ready to just carry a team offensively yet. Give him some support, and I think that's what Lou Lamoriello is going to look to do, bolster that top six forward group, give them a little more punch offensively up front. So great talk about the futures, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Again, when it comes to, this is our last edition of the Ice Guys in this format, but we're going to have plenty of NHL content in the offseason. We're going to do a draft recap show. We're going to do a free agency recap show. We'll give our thumbs up, thumbs down on what certain teams did in terms of free agency. That will be fun. Which teams made good moves that'll make them better going into next season? Which teams made bad signings that could make them worse going into next season, that could, tie their hands together from a salary cap perspective? We'll dive into all that kind of stuff as well. That'll be a fun show to do. We'll be doing that probably in early to mid-July. We're going to let probably free agency go for the first week, because sometimes there's a lot of signings the first day or two, but then there's some that trickle in a few days after that. Probably after the first week of free agency, that's when we'll jump in and do our free agency recap show and talk about what all the teams did. And don't forget, starting next week, we're going to have sports betting video content, live video content for other sports. In fact, we're happy to announce Andrew and I, us too, you see us here right now, we're doing a CFL weekly breakdown show. The 3-down breakdown is what we called it in the SBR era. We'll probably call it the same thing here for the Patreon Ice Guys subscribers, starting next Tuesday and every Tuesday during the summer months, 2 p.m. Eastern time. We're making it the same time as what the Ice Guys show was all these months. Starting next Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, we will be doing a weekly CFL preview show of the upcoming week slate of Canadian Football League action. Andrew McGinnis and myself. That's just the first announcement. We'll have some other things announced as well for some of the other sports. It's going to be more sporadic. The CFL show is the only thing I've cemented for a weekly, every single week type of deal yet. We'll do sporadic UFC stuff for when we close in on a big pay-per-view event. Alex and I would probably do a show for that. Maybe some baseball stuff. I think once we get into past the All-Star break in baseball, we'll get into some NFL and college football videos as well to preview the upcoming season south of the border with NFL and college football. So there's a lot of things on the horizon. So, if you want to unsubscribe until hockey comes back, feel free to do so. It's your choice, your call. But just know that if you decide to keep subscribed through June, July, August, September, we will be here for you with video content from a betting perspective in NHL off-season activities and some other sports, just so that you're aware of that. So looking forward to that. And that's going to be our next live show. It'll be next Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, and it won't be NHL. It'll be CFL, Andrew and I, and we'll talk week 2 in the Canadian Football League and look back a little at week 1 as well. So looking forward to that, Andrew, doing CFL stuff with you right here for the Patreon subscribers.
Absolutely. It's something that I really enjoyed doing with you on the SBR network. And, besides just talking hockey, it was kind of a good break. It's something that, for all of you out there, I know there are some people actually, and I never even told you this personally, that actually thought that you and I knew each other growing up. And, that's not true at all, but that's definitely something that, Ian and I started doing hockey together and then CFL in the summer. And it's a good mix up. I mean, as much as you and I both love hockey, I think we can both agree it's a good little change and good to get into the summer months here in Canada and talk some CFL. And the great thing about doing it on Tuesday, for all of you out there watching, typically that's when the odds will pop up, or else we'll see the opening numbers here. And that's, in a sport like the CFL, you're going to see a lot of changes where you got the Hamilton Tiger Cats opening up as 2.5-point favorites all the way up to +4 now, or sorry, -4. We'll help you beat that number and beat the line and get things going. So it should be a lot of fun. We hope to kind of build a good following there and get things going. And before we sign off, I got to bring out this shirt here, the We the North. Big game day, huge Raptors win tonight. They're taking the championship. Go Raptors.
I think they got a chance to. I took the points with them. +4. It's down to 2.5 now, and because I don't think Golden State can shoot better, and Toronto can't shoot worse, and Kawhi really can't play much worse than he did in Game 5 until the 2 big threes he hit in the fourth. It was not a good Kawhi Leonard game based on his standards. So, and you worry about Golden State too. They had to really expend the gas tank physically to pull out that game in Game 5. Emotional stress of seeing Kevin Durant, that gruesome injury, torn Achilles. Just worry about where's that physical and emotional gas tank for Golden State going into tonight. Do they have one more step up, everybody pull their bootstraps up, kind of huge, massive effort to once again stave off elimination tonight? I'm not so sure. And let's not forget Toronto at Oracle. They've had no fear walking into that building and playing well and winning. 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread at Oracle Arena for Toronto, head-to-head against Golden State in that building this season, regular season and playoffs combined. They're looking to make it a perfect 4-0 sweep at Oracle over Golden State if they indeed win tonight and end up being crowned NBA champions. Yeah, that'll be on the big screen at the Tim Hortons Field tonight after the Ticats game tonight. So they're doing a doubleheader with that. So looking forward to that. CFL gets going tonight. Thanks to everybody for tuning in, not only today, but all season, and subscribing, being a member, being a supporter of what we're trying to do here with the Patreon NHL Ice Guys. I think the best is yet to come. We're going to try to make this thing even bigger and better next season when we have a full season start to finish under our belt here to do the Patreon NHL Ice Guys. So we thank you again for all your support, for tuning in all season long. Don't forget, even though this is our last regular Ice Guys show for the season, we'll have NHL off-season shows in July, and Andrew and I will be starting a weekly CFL show for the Patreon subscribers next Tuesday. Remember to check us to find all our content and to subscribe. Check out www.patreon.com/iceguys. That is where you can find us. And if you're staying with us through the summer months, we look forward to talking to you with you again next week and beyond. If you're shutting it down for the rest of the summer until hockey returns, hope you have a great summer and definitely looking forward to next hockey season. And one last time, congratulations to the St. Louis Blues. For Andrew McGinnis, I'm Ian Cameron. Thanks for watching the Patreon NHL Ice Guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week, Andrew and I, when we talk CFL. Have a good one, everybody.